Olivia wanted to win. She wanted the last word, the final strike that would make her feel like she had the upper hand. She didn't stop to think about the weight of what she was about to say. She didn't consider the damage it would cause. And then she said it. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." The second those words left her mouth, everything changed. The fight that had been burning hot between them suddenly went cold. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Daniel didn't yell, he didn't argue back. He just stopped. And what happened next was heartbreaking. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today, we have a story that will make you rethink the power of words, the weight of unspoken resentment, and the breaking point of a marriage. To the outside world, Olivia and Daniel had what seemed like a solid marriage. They had routines, responsibilities, and the familiar rhythm of life together. Their neighbors saw them as the couple who always greeted people with polite smiles. Their co-workers assumed they had an average relationship, and even their closest friends had no reason to believe there was anything deeply wrong. But beneath the surface, their marriage was riddled with an unspoken heaviness, a quiet unraveling. It wasn't one catastrophic event that had brought them to this point. It was the accumulation of small wounds, little cracks that had deepened over time. Their love hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had changed. The warmth they once shared had faded, replaced by something colder, something distant. The problem wasn't just their disagreements, but how they handled them. Daniel had always been the one to voice his feelings, to talk about things when something felt off. He believed in working through issues openly, hashing them out before they could grow into something bigger. Olivia, on the other hand, never saw the point in discussing things that couldn't be undone. She swallowed her emotions, letting them pile up inside her like a dam under pressure. She told herself she was keeping the peace, that silence was easier than confrontation, until one day she couldn't hold it in anymore. And when she finally let it out, it came out in the worst possible way. That night, the tension in the house was unbearable. What had started as a simple disagreement, something about schedules or forgotten chores, had snowballed into something bigger, something that had nothing to do with what they were actually fighting about. Daniel was frustrated. "You never tell me what's wrong until you explode, Olivia. How am I supposed to fix things if you never talk about them?" She folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "Maybe because talking doesn't fix anything, Daniel. You want to sit down and dissect every little thing, but does it ever change? It's just the same cycle over and over." "That's not fair," he shot back, shaking his head. I always try. But you," he exhaled sharply, "you let everything fester inside you until you lash out. That's not communication, Olivia. That's sabotage." Something in her snapped. She had spent years biting her tongue, letting things slide, pretending certain words and actions didn't hurt. And now, everything she had bottled up came pouring out in a flood of bitterness she couldn't control. She wanted to win. She wanted to have the final word. And then, before she even realized what she was about to say, it slipped out. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." The moment the words left her mouth, the air in the room shifted. The argument itself evaporated. Daniel didn't yell. He didn't throw another insult at her. He just stopped. His face didn't contort in anger, didn't twist into frustration. Instead, something much deeper, much more fragile flickered in his eyes. Hurt. Not the kind of hurt that comes from a simple insult, but the kind that cuts down to the very core of a person, the kind that stays. His jaw tightened, his breathing slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to maintain control. His hands curled into fists at his sides, not out of rage, but as if he were holding something inside himself together. He swallowed, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "That's what you think of me?" It wasn't an accusation, just a question. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. She wanted to take it back. She wanted to tell him she hadn't meant it, that it had just come out in the heat of the moment, but it was too late. Daniel had never done this before. No matter how intense their arguments got, no matter how much resentment simmered between them, he had never left their bed. Even in silence, even when their backs were turned against each other, he was always there. But not tonight. When Olivia stirred awake in the middle of the night, expecting to feel his presence beside her, she was met with nothing but cold sheets. Drowsily, she reached across the bed, patting the empty space as confusion settled over her. Where was he? She got up, rubbing her eyes as she made her way through the darkened house. She checked the living room first, expecting to find him sprawled on the couch like he sometimes did after their fights. But the couch was untouched. The kitchen lights were off. There was no sign of him anywhere. Then, through the large glass doors leading to the balcony, she saw him. Daniel stood there, leaning against the railing, staring out into the night. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across his still figure. The air around him felt heavy, suffocating, as if something inside him had shifted permanently. Olivia hesitated for a moment before stepping outside, the cool night air prickling against her skin. "Daniel," she called softly. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her presence. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Why are you out here?" Still, no response. She walked closer, standing beside him, searching his face for any sign of emotion, anger, frustration, anything. But there was nothing. His expression was blank, his features unreadable. "I know you're upset," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But can we talk?" A bitter chuckle escaped him. "Talk?" His voice was quiet, almost hollow. "That's ironic, don't you think?" Her stomach twisted. This wasn't like him. Daniel never shut down like this. He always talked, always worked through things, always told her exactly what was on his mind. But now, he was shutting her out. She reached for his arm hesitantly, but the moment her fingers brushed against his skin, he pulled away. The rejection stung more than she expected. Days passed, and the distance between them only grew. At first, Olivia convinced herself that it was temporary, that he just needed time. But Daniel had never been the type to hold on to things like this. He didn't sulk, he didn't retreat into himself, not like this. Now, he barely looked at her. If she entered a room, he would find an excuse to leave. If she spoke, he answered in short, clipped sentences, if at all. If she reached out to touch him, even casually, he flinched, as if her touch burned him. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just hurt, it was detachment. It was as if, in a single night, he had erased her from his world. She tried to fix it. She made an effort to do all the things he loved. She cooked his favorite meals, plating them with care, hoping that a taste of familiarity would soften the wall between them. But his plate always remained half full. She tried to get him to watch his favorite shows, the ones they used to binge together late into the night. But he barely paid attention, lost in his own thoughts. She even tried affection, small touches, warm gestures, reaching for his hand the way she used to. But every time, he withdrew. It was as if her presence alone was too much for him to bear. And that's when she realized the horrifying truth. For years, she believed that as long as they fought, there was still something to fight for. That as long as emotions ran high, their love still burned beneath it all. But this silence, it felt like she had already lost him. What Olivia didn't know was that her words hadn't just stung, they had torn open a wound that had never truly healed. Daniel had carried this burden for years. It started when he was 17. At first, it had been nothing more than whispers in the school hallways, quiet snickers behind his back. He didn't even know why people were suddenly looking at him differently, until he found out where it had come from. His childhood lover. The girl he had trusted, the one he had once thought would never betray him, had spread the rumor. A careless joke between friends, an exaggerated comment that took on a life of its own. By the time he learned about it, the damage had already been done. You know what they say about Daniel, right? It's small. That's why she dumped him. It wasn't true. But truth didn't matter. It stuck to him like a stain he could never wash off. He remembered the first time he saw the way people looked at him differently, not with disgust, not even with pity, with amusement, like he was a joke. He pretended it didn't bother him, acted like he didn't care, but deep down, it followed him. He carried it through the years, into adulthood, into relationships where he tried to pretend it didn't matter. Years later, when he was ready to commit, he had proposed to the woman he had spent 6 years loving, the woman he had built a life around, and she had refused. Not because she didn't love him, not because she wasn't ready, but because she couldn't imagine a life where she wouldn't be satisfied. "I can't marry a man who will never be enough for me," she had said. That had destroyed him. So he buried it. He moved on, rebuilt himself, crafted a new identity where no one could ever make him feel like that again. And then he met someone who made him believe it never had to. Olivia. With her, he never questioned his worth. She made him feel seen, valued, not reduced to the insecurity he had buried so deep. Until that night. Until she said those words. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." In an instant, she had dragged him back. Back to that school hallway, back to the quiet humiliation of teenage whispers, back to the sting of betrayal, back to the moment that nearly broke him, because it hadn't just been school gossip. And now? Now he wasn't sure if he could ever look at her the same way again, because if she had said it, if she had thought it, then maybe it had always been true. And worst of all, maybe she was already looking for something better. For the first time since they had said their vows, Daniel wasn't sure if their marriage could survive. For weeks, Olivia had convinced herself that Daniel just needed time. Yes, things had been tense. Yes, he had barely spoken to her. Yes, he had withdrawn from their home, their routine, their marriage. But she had told herself that it wasn't permanent. That one night, one argument, couldn't possibly erase everything they had built. She clung to that belief. That was why, despite the distance between them, she had spent the past few days preparing for their anniversary. It was the perfect opportunity to fix things, to remind him of what they had, to show him how much she regretted the words that had slipped from her mouth that night. She had planned everything carefully. His favorite dinner, the candles he liked, the wine they drank on their honeymoon. She had even gone as far as writing a letter, pouring out everything she couldn't seem to say out loud. Apologies, promises, memories of the life they had built together. She wanted this night to be a fresh start. But by the time she walked through the front door, the house was silent. Too silent. At first, she thought maybe he was upstairs. Maybe he had come home early. Maybe, despite everything, he had remembered their anniversary too. But as she walked further inside, unease crept up her spine. Something felt off. And then she saw it. A single sheet of paper sat on the dining table, perfectly centered. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. Divorce petition. Her body went numb. She stared at the words in disbelief, willing them to disappear. Her hands trembled as she picked up the document, scanning the lines that confirmed what she had been too afraid to admit. He was gone. She dropped her bag to the floor, her heart pounding as she rushed upstairs. His closet, half empty, his nightstand, cleared out. The scent of his cologne, faint in the air, but no longer tied to his presence. Her hands gripped the doorframe as reality settled over her like a crushing weight. He had left. On their anniversary. Panic clawed at her chest as she reached for her phone. She dialed his number, her fingers shaking. It rang once, twice. Then, Voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Again. No answer. She dropped onto the bed, pressing the phone to her ear as she left a message. Daniel, please. Her voice cracked. Please don't do this. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but can we talk? Just, please call me back. She ended the call, sucking in a shaky breath, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. Her eyes landed on the dinner table she had set so carefully that morning, the plates, the candles, the unopened bottle of wine. It looked ridiculous now, a celebration for a marriage that no longer existed. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She had waited too long. She had spent weeks hoping time would fix what she had broken, not realizing that time had only pushed him further away. She had wasted the moments she should have spent fighting for him. And now, he was gone. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, the divorce papers still in her lap. She thought back to that night. The night she had let her frustration win, the night she had spoken words that could never be taken back. You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there. She had watched him freeze, watched the life drain from his face, watched his walls go up in a way she had never seen before, and still, she had assumed it would pass. She had believed that love could withstand anything, but what she had never considered, what she had refused to acknowledge, was that sometimes words didn't just hurt. Sometimes words destroyed. Because this wasn't just about that night. This was about every moment that had led them here. The unresolved arguments, the growing distance, the things left unsaid. Her insult had been the final blow to a foundation that had already been cracking for years. And now, looking at the empty space where he used to be, she realized something terrifying. She might never get him back. For the first time in her life, Olivia understood what true regret felt like. Not the kind you fix with an apology, not the kind that fades with time, the kind that lingers, the kind that follows you, the kind that reminds you over and over again that some mistakes cost more than you're willing to lose. She gripped her phone tightly, staring at his name on the screen. Should she keep calling? Should she show up at his hotel, his friend's house, wherever he had gone? Or was it already too late? What do you think? When does an apology stop being enough? Can love rebuild itself after being shattered, or are some wounds simply too deep to heal? Let us know your thoughts below. And as always, thank you for watching.